I think it's just unbelievably important to have a budget before you start planning an Italian wedding, for a lot of different reasons. Partly because you can communicate this to your partner, which I'll talk a little bit about, but also to your suppliers. You can go in with a good understanding of what you want to spend for each area. Even if you don't end up being able to achieve that, you know your own personal kind of remit and boundary that you're trying to keep things within, how that all adds up, to make sure that you're guided through planning and you don't go way over, but equally you don't underspend on things that are important to you because you think that you need to. I've seen almost every single wedding I plan, couples spend more than they originally want to and think they need to. So a buffer is always the kind of number one thing that needs to go in your budget, but we'll go through that and what percentage of your budget it should be. I also just wanted to touch on, I think money is a strange thing and it brings out different emotions and triggers in people. So I think it's a really good idea to talk to your partner about this, as deep as you want to get or as deep as you want to go, but just understand how each of you kind of feel about money, maybe definitely what you want to spend on a wedding and what you see is important about where your money goes, and getting that really clear from the start as well, because I commonly see that couples are not aligned on priorities most of the time. Maybe the first couple like catering, but commonly one person might care more about decorations than another, and they may not see the value in having flowers, whereas another person might care more about the drinks and may want that to all be covered. So just trying to understand each other, not necessarily agreeing, but understanding each other's perspective right from the start can be quite helpful as well. And if you're further along in planning and you haven't had that conversation, I think it will save maybe some disagreements if you did that kind of early on. So everyone has a different budget, right? So when I got married 10 years ago almost, I had 15 grand, which at the time was about 10 grand less than the average wedding. So I was really tight and I was on a real budget, and I had to really think about how I was going to spend all of that money very carefully. Now budgets tend to be, I work with budgets that are around 50k up in planning world, but I'm very much advising couples that have smaller budgets as well on how to still achieve weddings that are much more in the 20s and 30s, because that is all still possible, and only you'll know what you have as your ideal spend. It's just about getting connected to the right people, the right suppliers. You can have a wedding on any budget as long as you're informed and you're realistic about what you can have within that. There's just no way to shoehorn 100 grand budget into a 60 grand budget. But if you've got 60 grand and you prioritize well and you find the right suppliers, then you'll definitely be able to have what you want as you go through planning. So let's get into this budget. I'm going to show you a wedding that I did this year, just to show you the kind of type of wedding that I'm imagining we're going to plan as I go through my little scenario. So this is just a couple of pictures from this wedding. It was in a kind of off-site ceremony. So it was in San Galgano Abbey, which is in Tuscany. Then they went back to a venue where they had dinner for, let's say, 60 people. The decor was to me, this is quite an intense decor wedding. We had to hire almost everything kind of differently, and it wasn't just what the caterer had as their options. And then they had a few extras like a vintage car, and they had to transport their guests around. So I thought this would be a good case study to show you how this kind of stacks up as well. Let's just get the budget up. So as we go through this, please ask questions. You can pop them in the chat, or you can put the sound on if you like, because I'm going to try and explain what this case study was and what they spent, but also at the same time the range of pricing you can expect to spend at at a wedding in the next year or the next 2 years. There's quite a lot to get through. So before I go on to that, do you have any questions? Actually, I don't want to skip ahead too fast. We're all good. Okay. So here's a budget. This is the budget that you can get for free on the Lista site. I've actually made some amends to it as I've gone through and prepared for this, so I will update the new version. The first line in the budget for me is always the venue, which is a whole can of worms. So if you go on lalista.com, you'll see a lot of venues, and what we've tried to do on here is put lots of venues of different shapes and sizes and put transparent pricing information as much as we can, because it does change and things change. But to give you an idea when you're first scoping out your wedding, kind of what's realistic, what can you actually get in a venue? Does the venue that you really like cost too much, or is it in the budget? So you can use that directory as a way to kind of plug this in and see what you should be budgeting for your venue right from the start. This is quite optimistic. It's €10,000. The venue that they actually had that wedding I showed you in was only €8,800 to stay for 4 nights. So that can go straight in as my rental fee. More commonly, we're seeing couples spend a bit more than that. So I'd say the average venue price has gone up quite a lot, and most people end up at the moment spending more, kind of 12 to 25,000 euro. But this depends on the size of their venue, how many guests can stay in it, where it is in Italy. Obviously, you can find venues where you sleep many, many more people, but it costs the same as a venue where you sleep less. If you have many more people, you can charge them back to stay and you can cover the cost of your venue. So you can just find a way that works for you. And there's a line at the bottom here, I hope, yes, guest contribution, which is the amount that you can charge your guests back to stay. So this couple, this venue only slept, say, 20 people. So let's say they charged everyone €150 per night for 3 nights, and there were 20 guests. They might make back €9,000, £9,000, and that comes off the total budget at the end, and happily that covers the cost of their venue. So nice and tidy. We've also got wedding fees in here. So wedding fees are a strange conundrum. Some places don't charge them, some do. Wedding fees tend to cover the cost of having a lot more people come into a venue, because it does cause more cleaning to be required. It can mean that they have to bring in extra amenities, extra people. So I say on the whole, a venue wedding fee is justified. How high it is can and cannot be justified. So the average wedding fee could be like 500 or €1,000, and that seems pretty fair to me. If it's higher than that, I just want to understand why and what that covers. And that principle goes through everything that I'd book in a wedding. I might go into it having expectations that it should be €500, and then I might be educated that it's more and why it's more. And as long as I feel confident in understanding why it's more and I'm happy with that, I can move ahead. But if I don't understand the value that I'm getting out of something and I still think something's overpriced, I don't think I should be booking it, because I'll always slightly be thinking, well, that's more than it should be, and I might carry a bit of resentment for that. So I just always try and understand what's driving all of these prices, and if I don't agree with them, I might say something. In this case, when it's a venue, you can't really argue. I don't think many venues really negotiate, but that will come down to you and how much you love the venue, and you could stomach kind of spending something that you don't quite agree with or whatever. So anyway, in this case, they actually have no venue fee, so I'll take that out. They do have other event fees. So if you have an event the day before and the day after, you had to pay €300 for having those people come on and off site. So that's in there. They also had a late music fee. Again, €300 for each event where you went past midnight with the music. That's a strange one. That's very particular to this venue. But the point here with all of these different venue costs is every venue has quite a few different strange nuances and costs, and your job is to find out all of them before you book it, because you don't want, you know, €600 to one person might not be that much, but it's still a massive amount to just come in your budget as a surprise. And if you had 2 or 3 of those come into the budget as a surprise, for some people that's completely unaffordable and it makes their wedding, you know, not possible, or it's really stressful. So when you sign that contract, you've got to know all of these different costs and make sure that you've put them in your budget and you know you can afford your venue. A mistake I see some people make is massively overcommit upfront to the venue. So spend way too much on that venue because you've fallen totally in love with it. I totally get it. But then you're not able to do the other things that you want, or it becomes a bit disappointing through planning because you have to spend quite a lot less on things that are important to you. So you're, you know, choosing between 2 caterers instead of 6 caterers because they're the only ones that are in your budget. So just being mindful, I'd say, and sensible-ish, as sensible as you can be with weddings when you book that venue, just not maxing yourselves out right from the start, because that can add layers of stress to your planning as well. Okie dokie. The next thing is tourist tax, something that often is missed out of a budget. Again, this relates to the venue, but your number of guests times usually €150 or €2 per night that they stay will be charged to you in tourist tax. Some couples charge this to their guests, and some just pay it. It's usually a relatively low amount of money. And again, good to have in there from the start. So that's your venue section. Let's make it pink. Then we move on to like the ceremony section in the budget. So in here, I've got absolutely everything. Symbolic celebrant, which is your choice. You can have a celebrant or not. You could have a friend or family member take this role, or you could have a professional celebrant that works with you to develop a really detailed, personalized celebration. They tend to cost €500 up. There's some great ones in Italy. There's people that come from abroad. It's just a personal thing as to kind of what you would like to do. In this scenario, the couple did not have a celebrant because they went to a town hall. They went to San Galgano, which is officially a town hall premises, and the cost for their ceremony there is actually €1,800. I've also got in here church donation. So this is if you were to have a kind of wedding in a church, usually a Catholic church in Italy, you tend to have to make a donation to the actual church that you got married in and for the priest. So you usually have to get an English speaking priest to come and do the ceremony, and that requires a donation as well. So this can add up sometimes to like €1,000 if you're doing it to both churches. So just to be aware, churches are not free. And then there's legal paperwork. So if you're having a church ceremony or a civil ceremony, you need to go through certain legal steps. There's guides to this in the club and on the shop of La Lista. They different amounts depending on where you're from in the world, and the steps that you have to go through, but they tend to be around €500 to go through the paperwork as well. So those guys have to pay that. I'm just going to check if there's any questions. Taking a step back, Zora asked about the venue. What's a sensible percentage of the overall budget to be allocated to the venue? I don't have an answer for that percentage wise. I know it's more detailed, but I would go through this and work out all of the costs, all of the things that you want, and then that will show you what you've got kind of left to have for the venue. That's the way that I do it for my clients, partly because everyone wants a different number of things, different types of things, but equally venues just are such a range of prices. It's kind of not possible to do it that way in my mind. Right, let's go on to catering. So I've got a total amount in here. But there is also another spreadsheet I have, which is the catering calculation tool, also in the club. I'm not sure if it's on the shop, but it's a spreadsheet like this where you plug in all the costs of the catering that you get proposals from, because just like venues, all caterers have very different proposals, different costs. Usually I make my own little catering budget because there's lots of different parts that make up the budget for catering. So the actual meal itself, sometimes there's extra costs for certain drinks, the aperitif, for the bar. So you can kind of add all of this up and feed it into here. But for now, I would just suggest that if you have, say, this 60-person wedding, for 60 people these days and looking in the next 2 years, you're probably going to look to spend between 140 and 200 euro per person with most of the caterers that are out there. That's a good kind of general. The lower end, the 140, that's really quite rare to find a really good caterer that's at that 140. It's much more common to spend 190 or 200 when you're thinking about 60 people. To Italian wedding caterers, that's quite a small amount of people, and that's why the costs tend to go up. There's two models of caterer. One will maintain the price no matter what the cost, no matter the number of guests that you have. So that 140 cost could be per person for 60 people, or it could be per person for 120 people. That's also quite rare, but it is possible. There are caterers that follow that. Then there are others that every 10 people that you go up in guest number, you go up in price. You go down in price, of the menu. So here we've got 60 at 180 euro. If you went down to 50 people, it would go up to 190 euro. So the long and short of it is, if you haven't budgeted for catering yet, and if you're around 60 people, I'd go 180, 190, and then go from there and calculate upwards. To be really safe, I just, at the moment, when I'm doing my first budget for a couple, I put in 200 times the number of guests, because that covers almost every single caterer for bar and catering. And even though it might be massively over budgeting, it's just super kind of cautious as like a placeholder for your budget amount for catering. You've also got tax to apply. So I do this strange way of multiplying it by 1.1 because it's 10% tax on food. So then I just know that that's a really good budget estimate for that number of guests. I know that my bar is included in that cost, so I don't need a bar line, but I do need catering. I guess it's a catering buffer. I want to know that if something comes up, so especially before I've seen any catering proposals, I don't know for sure that they're going to have like the cheese station that I want. I don't know that they're going to do my champagne tower. I don't know if a cake's included. So I just need to be really sure that I've put a buffer in just for those extra things if they don't happen. Also hours of service. So every caterer works for about 7 hours as their standard proposal, and almost every wedding is more like 10 hours. So you need to budget for a few extra hours of the bar, and this always comes at a cost, and the cost is always different with every caterer. It can be between 300 to 500 euro, upwards of like 1,000 per hour. So you can see why having a catering budget is a super like smart and must-do thing to kind of have in your budget. So I think they had extra hours, and I think they had a couple of other little things. So I've just put in 3,000 there to be sure. Just going to check my questions. If you have a smaller catering, 30 people, are caterers still keen to cater, or are they used to doing bigger weddings? Really great question. You can be super tactical here. So I would get some proposals from caterers themselves for 30 people and expect them to be very high price, because they will probably just have a minimum spend. So it will start at a certain base price to just come and bring everything and all the things that they need to deliver their service. And then there's your kind of 30 people on top. It might be better to bring in a private chef. So a kind of different model would be to bring in a private chef who can still do probably I was going to say better catering, but potentially a higher quality of catering, because they are used to dealing with a smaller number of guests in a more intimate way. They may also be more flexible in what they can offer. They may even use slightly different food, because bigger caterers, they have the same menus, the same produce that they're literally buying every single day, whereas a chef may be slightly more nuanced there. And then you would just have to rent your equipment separately. So you'd go to one of the hire companies and order your chairs and tables, your plates, your cutlery, all of the things that a caterer would normally include. And you may find that you potentially save a little bit of money, but that you also get a slightly more personalized experience, which in my experience can be really nice when it's a more intimate wedding as well. Thank you. I think that's it on catering. You're still with me. Music. Crikey, this is all very challenging to explain, mainly because it's just so different for everyone. So music tax is a given. In Italy, you have to pay music tax, and this tends to be around €365. So that's just in there. Musicians, DJ, this couple had, what did they have? Let's say they had strings at the ceremony. Strings tend to be €1,500 to €2,500. So let's put in a ballpark there. You need to think about how your kind of sound is going to be covered all day. So they had the strings at the ceremony, fine. At the ceremony, there's also a PA and a mic. So I know that that's all covered. When they get back and they've got aperitivo, dinner and party, I booked a DJ that would cover it all, because I don't want to be faffing around with someone else is bringing a PA over here and we're plugging in the music and da-da-da-da. If it can be afforded, it's so much easier for everyone if someone else is completely overseeing all of those kind of transitions of the day. So the DJ that we booked was actually a lot more money than this. It's like €4,000, but it covered, as I say, the PA and the mic at the aperitif, and they actually did some like live performing as well. They've got drums and things like that. Then at the dinner, they DJ'd, and then at the party, they did their full DJ set. So that for me is an ideal and easy setup. You can pay, let's say you could start at maybe €900 for a really good DJ these days, who would cover all of those aspects of the day. And obviously you can just go up to wild amounts. If you want a band, I'd say bands usually start, you can get a good band for about €3,000 or €4,000 in Italy. If you get them from abroad, which a lot of couples do, you obviously need to think about their travel and also renting their sound equipment as well. So you could have a relatively low cost band. All of these terms, when I say low cost, this is just in wedding world, where the thousands become much less in my mind. So don't get me wrong, I totally understand that this is all a lot of money. But a band starting at £4,000, let's say, if we're bringing them from England, actually a really good price. They're amazing. But once I've added on travel for 5 of them and I need all their equipment and the staging and everything, that's soon like 10,000. So bands really do add up. And that's where, again, if we're budgeting, if we put that in from the start and your budget comes out way over, you're just going to have to rejig and reprioritize. Anyway, here we are. So DJ. Decor, impossible to forecast at the beginning of your wedding planning. I'd just say go a little bit high, because everybody tends to spend more than they think that they want to at the start of planning. It's an area that you can easily say, oh, we'll just cut that back when we get to it. But often people find that they care when they get to it and they want things, and they might not have allocated the budget that they could have for this. It's hard to say an average, because obviously weddings are all different sizes. I'd say the lowest amount I'd see someone spend on decor with quite minimal stuff. So quite a simple ceremony, quite nice but basic lighting, flowers on the table, things like that. It's about €8,000. And obviously, again, it can go wildly up. I'd say there's nothing wrong with, again, being cautious here and just slightly maybe over budgeting, just to make sure that you're safe as you go through planning. Stationery I've pulled out as a separate one, but I usually put it into decor. I think I've pulled it out here because maybe invites you do before you get on to all of the main decor. The wedding that I showed you, with that decor was, so it was for 60 people. They probably did spend about 12 grand. And that's because we had chairs that we bought in for the ceremony and the dinner. We had quite a nice ceremony kind of setting. They had stationery throughout the day, so an order of service and bespoke menus and things like that. And then they had all this drapery overhead, which actually was done on the cheap, because I did it, which was actually very hard, and I won't ever do it again. But that would usually cost more as well, because you'd go through a proper experienced person that does draping. So that was relatively good value as well, for what they achieved. I'm just going to check the questions. Okay, we're getting there. So photographer, videographer, this is again just a wild amount. You can get amazing photographers for 2,000 or 3,000, and you can spend 20,000. At the moment, costs seem to be kind of 4,000 upwards. This particular photographer they had was 6,000. And videographer, you can get great options, quite low price. I think on La Lista we've got a few that are around 2,000 or 3,000. That is low in the general world of videographers. And again, it can go up to crazy amounts. So I think they spent about 5,000 on that. Hair and makeup. Hair and makeup is looking at kind of costing upwards of about 600 for the bride. Most quotes that I get at the moment are looking more like 800 for a bride, and that's from an Italian hair and makeup artist. There are options that are a lot lower, and if you look at your kind of home market, so you might look at the UK market, you have such better kind of value when it comes to hair and makeup artists. So my recommendation a lot of the time to my clients is that they have a local option, because then they can have trials at home. They get good value for money on all of the actual services, and then they can fly them over to Italy and still potentially spend a tiny bit lower or the same amount as if having an Italian, but they've been able to have the trials at home. Equally, on the Italian side, they are, you'll probably have looked, but they're really, really good at what they do. So they are top end hair and makeup artists, but that obviously does come with a price. In the Facebook group at the moment, I've seen quite a lot of conversations about hair and makeup artists that you can find in Italy, and there are loads and loads of good ones out there. A lot of my international clients that don't get over to Italy before the wedding, they tend to do a trial the day before the wedding, and genuinely it goes really, really well. So this is obviously a really personal choice, and it comes down to how confident you feel having your hair and makeup done, how, you know, the experiences you've had in the past. That's just down to what you feel is going to work. But as a rule, I would again budget relatively high here, just to just be cautious. So I think, what did we pay? It's about €800 for the bride, and then 200 for everybody else. So let's put in 1,600. Extra touches. For extra touches, I mean things like a tenner, like a surprise, a tenner, or fireworks, or some sort of cart that's going to come along, something that's just a bit slightly out there and tends to be a surprise for everybody. Transport, we had to think for this wedding about transporting everybody to the Abbey and back again. Transport is it's relatively good value for what you get out in Italy, because if you think everything is quite far apart, transport is hard to budget. Again, there's a guide in the club on this around the average price that you tend to spend by size of bus. And the reason you need to care about that is because in Italy, a lot of places are quite hard to get to. So your guests may decide to stay at a venue which only a minibus can get to, so an 8-seater minibus, and then you're just trapped into having 3 or 4 small minibuses, but you might have budgeted for just one big bus, and those minibuses cost a lot more than having one big bus. So again, just be kind of mindful here around what you're budgeting. I have budgeted, let's say here, for 2 28-seaters. Sorry. And they are around €900 each for the time that I need them. So if you just have a rule in your mind that no matter the size of the bus, if you go for around €800 per bus, that's quite a good budget to kind of just have in your mind. I was going to say something else. Something else on transport. No, it was that you can control where your guests stay to some degree. So when you come to book your venue, you'll know whether you want everyone on site or not. It's not for everybody, but having everyone on site obviously takes away the need for transport, which is a bit of a drain because it's costly and it also is quite complicated. If your guests do stay off site, it's just such a good idea to guide them towards specific places to stay, because you can limit the amount of places they stay, which limits the complication of the transport, but also you can pre-check that the buses can get to those places, so you know up front that what you're telling them to do is going to work for you and for your transport budget. Okay, then moving on to wedding planners. I've just put in the cost of a wedding planner in here. These guys actually did partial wedding planning with us, so it was a bit less than this, but if you have any sort of wedding planning support, pop it in here. It may be that you want to plan your own wedding, it may be that you definitely want a planner, and as you start to reach out to planners, you'll soon get to grips with all the different prices that they can charge and all the different services. I'd say it depends what you want from a planner, but 5,000 is probably a good starting point to think about when you're thinking of a planner. They can have services that start much lower and go much higher. So you might have a feel for the sense of service that you're looking to get, or from the style of the planners that you've been looking at, you might know that that's actually going to be quite an expensive planner, therefore I need to budget a bit more there. Then we're on to wet weather, which sucks. Oh no, I'm going to answer this question. Do planners mostly work on commission or fixed? What a good question. Most planners tend to work on commission, but that means they also have a fixed fee. So the model is low fixed fee of, well, let's just say low fixed fee, and then the suppliers that you book, they take a commission. And you should ask the question, but I think that should always be completely transparent, because if you know that you're gonna kind of be giving commission to the planner through your suppliers, you can work out what the planner's getting paid overall. So if your planner is only €2,000, but then they get commission on everything and they make €10,000 in total, but you wanted another planner that was €10,000, but you thought at the start that's actually too much, you could have had who you really wanted anyway. So it's really good to get that clear. Equally, commission can mean that planners are pointing you in the direction of suppliers that are going to give them commission. And it's not always the way it goes, but I have seen it where couples want to book a certain supplier and the planner is not keen on it because they won't get commission, and the planner either kind of doesn't want to work with the supplier or tries to start controlling who they choose, or they just won't be involved, so they leave you to book the suppliers because they're not getting a commission. That's not a common thing, but it is a thing that can happen. So then you've also just got planners that just do a fixed fee up front, so you just have a fixed fee and it's never going to change, and they're not going to add commission onto anything, and they're going to let you work with anyone. I say let you, encourage you to work with anyone to make your wedding the way that you want it to be. And then you also have planners that charge on a percentage of the total budget. So they might have like a minimum fee. So they might say it's at least going to be €5,000, but then 2 weeks from your wedding, we'll work out what 10% of your budget is, and we will charge you that. So yeah, that can work for some people, and it doesn't work for others. It can mean that it's in a planner's interest for you to spend more money, because then they will get a higher percentage or a higher total payout. So that's planners. Wet weather, let's go there. So when you're choosing your venue, you'll see whether it's got a wet weather option. Obviously it's a preference that it does, but I'd say it's quite rare to have a good wet weather option in a venue. So it's good to just have a contingency for whatever you might need. This 2,000 is about 1,500 to 2,000 is the amount that we tend to put down as a deposit for a tent. So it's just my go-to of an amount to have as a placeholder there. And then finally, other events around the wedding. So you'll know what you want to do from the start. I want to get people together and I want to have drinks, or I would love to have a pizza. It's worth just plotting in that you're going to have what you really, really want. So if it's a pizza, but you think, oh, we might not be able to afford it, you can see. So this couple, 60 people, a catering for a pizza has drastically changed in price in the last 2 years. And most caterers are at least €50 to bring in all of their equipment and cook live pizza and serve it to your guests along with some form of a bar. So 60 people at €60 is what I've got in here. I should also add in the tax, and that's quite low budget. So I might want to have some form of contingency, or I might know from the start that's just going to be far too much. What I can afford is to stock my own bar and just have everyone over for some drinks before dinner, or go to a bar in town and put £1,000 behind the bar, and that's what we're going to do. So a few different options, but you can plot that in. Then yeah, the day after is the same, whatever you think you might want to do. When it comes to catering, the lowest kind of priced option would be having a brunch, or some people would have like a pizza delivery brought in while everyone's round by the pool. They're kind of lower priced, up to having a barbecue or a fully catered event with another bar again. Barbecues cost a lot because they are incredible and very impressive, but they have a lot of meat and a lot of different variations. So they can be up to €100, €120 per person. Bear that in mind. I've also got lines for the other things like decor or speakers. Sometimes people have musicians or a DJ at this point. So same prices as we went through before, but just make sure that you've scoped all of that out as well. I've duplicated here. I've got the event fee, and I've got transport again, because in this wedding I want to bring people to my welcome night. So I'm going to put on transport, but on the pool party day I'm going to let them make their own way, because as we commonly find, people are a little bit hungover, and even if you put on buses and things, they tend to come late or they tend to drive themselves. So I think this is somewhere that you can potentially look to cut back, but it depends on your guests. It depends on what your event is, where your event is, how accessible everything is for your guests as well. And then I've just got the generic things that you will personally know kind of how much you're going to want to spend here. So wedding insurance is a bit of a fib because it doesn't really exist anymore. Clothing, rings, all of these bits. I think it's worth tracking the travel, including the tastings and the travel that you do overall. You've probably seen on TikTok, like women's maths, female maths. A lot of females tend to hide these parts of the budget from their other half because they don't really count. If you want to check it all, it's there. It's there for you too. So the total of this budget in euros is currently looking at 90,000 basically, which is just a huge amount of money. I change everything to GBP in this, but obviously it's super easy to just change the currency and just look up the current exchange rate and kind of change it in that cell there, so that you get kind of where you might be coming out at. And then we've got that guest contribution that we did earlier. So number of guests, number of nights, amount per person comes off the total budget. And then you've got what you've got. And probably every single couple ever, this is higher than their budget when they've been through and done this. And there's lots of things obviously you can do to tweak it and work it out. I'm just going to stop that for a second and see what else I wanted to tell you. I guess if you've got any questions, because I've just talked so much, thank you for your questions throughout. No, okay, that's good, I think. I was just going to recap what I think is important. So communication between you and your partner is key, obviously, but it's also important between you and your suppliers. So by making a budget like this, I feel like you're then much more kind of armed and equipped to go into conversations with suppliers, because you kind of know what you want to spend, but you also understand what things probably should cost. So you're going to make good decisions. I think it's worth setting this forecast, even if it's not 100% accurate, for those reasons. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's a good place to start. I would also say track all your spend. So on another spreadsheet or in a tab in your budget, every time you spend money, just write down who you sent it to and what date you sent it, because you don't often get receipts and things from suppliers. So just making sure that you have noted all of those dates means that if someone ever asks, they realize 2 months before the wedding they didn't get your deposit, which does happen, and they say, when did you send it? You've just got it all there for you. And it's much easier to do that as you go than going back and doing it. I've learned the hard way. And as I said, don't overcommit up front on the venue. It's a pattern that I will probably continue throughout your planning. So if you overcommit there, then you probably will do the same in some other areas as well. So just get this forecast clear before you pick the venue, so you know what you can definitely be comfortable with as you go through planning. I've got a question, which is, in your opinion, which areas could you save the most money? In every area you can save money, or you can, it's just comes down to your priorities, I think. If you set yourself off on the right foot with that venue and pick a clever venue, that's obviously one of your biggest spends. And then your next biggest spend is your catering. So finding a caterer that meets your requirements in terms of what they offer, and the quality should be the first things. But then if they're really good value and they can include as much as you can get from them, so all of the drinks, unlimited drinks, bar, if you can get as much out of your caterer, then that will work well for you. Again, that's such a big part of your budget. It's an easier place to take off a bigger percentage. Having a photographer and videographer duo can work really well, because when they work together, they tend to be less. So if you think in this scenario, we had, what do we have, like £6,000 and £5,000. You don't often see a duo that's 11 grand. You would see them at more 6, 7, 8,000. So you're saving quite a few thousand there by having them work together. They're harder to find, good duos, but they are out there, and they're really good at what they do. The other events around the wedding is somewhere that we always slightly deprioritize. So get those big important pillars of wedding planning booked in first. Have the budget saved for the pre and post event, but kind of revisit that later. And if you need to, you can pull in kind of money from there and those budget pots, because that's all just about people being together, in my opinion. I don't think that needs to be all bells and whistles, lots of decorations, lots of things going on. People just want to see each other that first night, and you could achieve that in so many different ways, and they could be, low cost ways. And the same the day after. They just want to get back together and talk about your wedding. It's nice if there's food and drink, but I don't think it's a necessity. It's more just about getting people together, that kind of community feeling. I think It's so wonderful to do full events with multiple days of catering and everything under the sun. I love decorations, but it's definitely not an absolute requirement, especially if you're working on a budget that you're trying to fit a lot into. Just a few things there. That's okay, thank you. So I just wanted to point you in the direction of more resources, because this is obviously just a super quick kind of run through of things. On the website, we obviously have loads of articles, so you can kind of go on there and search for anything and it should come up. There's quite a few budget articles working within different budgets, 40 grand, 60 grand. We're about to do that again in January for 2025. We're going to do that budget series again. There's also YouTube, I think, videos on those things that breaks those costs down as well. Probably not that dissimilar to what we've just been through, to be honest. On the directory, you've got up-to-date costs of venues and suppliers, so you can plug those into a budget like this and you've got realistic kind of prices for people. I know that it's a lot of admin, but it really is worth just getting quotes and firing off emails and seeing what the things you want actually cost to be able to do a good budget. I've mentioned YouTube and obviously the club. Like, this is what we do every couple of weeks. We go through things in a lot of detail, and there's a lot more videos in there about all of the details that sit behind that budget, every single one of those types of suppliers, what they cost, what they do, how to pick them, just loads of stuff. So it's there if you want it, and if you can bear to listen to more of me kind of talking through all of these things. But it has been a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm going to ask if you've got any other questions, and otherwise we'll call it a day. We've managed to just keep it within an hour. I can't believe you've stayed with me. That was a long hour. Oh, thank you. I'm so pleased it was useful. Okay, I'm going to let you go then. Have a nice rest of your day, and I'll hopefully see you again soon.